15 years of sacrifice ended with my sons standing in front of a judge and telling him their stepdad was their real dad. And just like that, their adoption legally erased a $2 million trust fund, one I let revert back to me while they celebrated what they thought was their betrayal paying off. Hey Reddit, I'm 48, male, and I spent 15 years raising my 2 sons alone, doing everything I could to give them a future, every choice shaped around them. Then one day, they stood in court and chose another man over me, and what they didn't realize was that this choice set off a chain of events none of us could have predicted. Let's just say it didn't end the way they thought it would. You don't raise kids alone for 15 years expecting them to spit in your face. But that's exactly how it went down. Harry was 17. Theo was 16. I was the one getting up at 5 in the morning, packing their lunches, sitting through those boring school concerts, working 2 jobs so they wouldn't feel the absence of their mom. She bailed early on, then came back years later with what she called an upgrade. Some clown named Pete who walked around like he'd invented fatherhood. And after all those years, where did it land us? Family court. I'll never forget sitting on those stiff benches, my back tight, my hands still. My boys sat across from me, both wearing those dumb teenage grins you see when kids think they've outsmarted everyone. Next to them sat my ex-wife, smug, like she just won the lottery, and Pete had his arm draped over the back of the bench like he owned the place. The judge hadn't even walked in yet, and I could see her leaning in close to Harry and Theo, whispering fast, like a coach drawing up a last-minute play, her lips moving quick, Harry nodding, Theo laughing under his breath like the whole thing was a joke. That was the first punch to the gut. They weren't nervous. They weren't conflicted. It felt rehearsed, like betraying me was just another step in the plan. When the judge finally came in, she asked the basics. Harry, Theo, are you sure about this adoption? Do you understand what it means? Harry straightened up, shoulders back, like he was giving a speech. Yes, Your Honor. Pete is the real father in our lives. He's shown us what being a dad actually means. I swear my ears rang at that. Real father. I wanted to stand up and scream. Who stayed up with you when you had a fever? Who worked double shifts so you'd never miss Christmas presents? But I didn't. I sat there, jaw locked tight, because I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. Then it was Theo's turn, and this kid. He reached into his pocket, and instantly I knew what it was. A photo. One of the old ones I kept in the living room, the 3 of us at the park when he was about 8. I thought it went missing months ago. He held it up, ripped it clean down the middle, and let it fall straight into my lap without saying a word. Then he walked across the courtroom and stood next to Pete like it meant nothing. I can't explain the silence that fills your chest when your own son does something like that. It isn't loud. It isn't even painful at first. It's just empty. The judge banged the gavel. Adoption approved. That was it. 15 years of my life erased in less than 2 minutes. My boys ran to Pete like he was some hero. He wrapped them up in his arms, grinning at me over their shoulders like he'd just won a championship. My ex-wife leaned into him, eyes glinting with victory. I walked out without saying a word. Walking out of that courthouse felt like leaving a funeral, except the casket was my own damn effort. When I got home, the house felt too quiet. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. For years, I kept a separate account tucked away. Every double shift, every weekend job, saving whatever I could. The number stared back at me. $447,000. That was the nest egg. Proof I wasn't cheap, just careful. Money meant for college, weddings, life. Now it just sat there, mocking me. I told myself I should be angry, but I wasn't. Not yet. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped me out and left me staring at 4 walls that felt less like home and more like a cage. And somewhere inside that emptiness, I felt it. A small flicker. Not hope, not sadness, something sharper. Because if they thought I was going to roll over and disappear, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I lay on the couch for hours that night. My phone buzzed a couple of times with work emails, 1 spam text. But nothing from Harry or Theo. Not even a sorry, Dad. Figures. I should have expected that. My head started spinning with numbers the way it always did when I didn't want to think about emotions. That's how I survived being a single dad all those years. And then I remembered something. My dad, their grandfather. He wasn't rich, but he was old school smart with money. Before he passed, he set up a trust fund for Harry and Theo. The whole point was to make sure they had something waiting for them when they hit college. I'd never touched it. Not a dime. Even when things got tight, that fund was off limits. Sacred. So lying there in that hollow pit of a night, staring at the ceiling, I started thinking, what happens to that trust now that they're not legally my sons anymore? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one guy who would. William. He was more than just our lawyer. He'd known me since I was a kid, back when I still had scraped knees and didn't hate the word family. He'd been my dad's friend before he was mine. If anyone would tell me the truth straight, it was him. I called him the next morning. My voice cracked when I told him what went down in court. He didn't sound surprised. Son, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I warned you your ex-wife was maneuvering. Forget her, I said. I need to know about the trust. Dad's fund. What happens to it now? There was a pause on the line, too long. My stomach twisted. William, don't hold out on me. Finally, he sighed. Your father, he was sharper than you thought. Your dad set up a reversion clause. He wrote that if Harry and Theo ever stopped being your legal dependents, the trust wouldn't stay with them. It would revert back to you as the remainder beneficiary. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, not breathing. Say that again. It's yours now. $2 million. No strings attached. He didn't trust your ex-wife to manage it. He assumed if the boys ever walked away from you, they didn't deserve it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall. $2 million, plus the $447,000 I'd already saved. $2,447,000 sitting within reach. My father, even from the grave, had seen through all of this. For the first time since court, I smiled. Not a big smile. Not joy. Just a small, sharp grin. They thought they upgraded. They thought the broke stepdad with leased cars and credit debt was their golden ticket. They had no clue. They had just signed away their entire future. I thanked William and told him I'd come by later in the week for the official paperwork. After hanging up, I pulled the safe out of the closet. Inside was a binder with every password, every bank login, every emergency plan I'd ever made. I logged into my accounts and watched the numbers stack up. It didn't feel real. And still, the anger wasn't gone. I needed to know how deep this betrayal really went. So I dug back into the closet and pulled out Theo's old MacBook. He'd used it in his early high school years before begging me for something newer. I kept it, half thinking I'd wipe it and use it as a backup someday. I flipped it open, logged in, and damn if his iCloud account wasn't still connected. Messages started popping up. Photos, group chats, years of history, and what I read made my stomach drop. He only cares about money, not us. That's why he's always working. Other dads take their kids on trips. He just makes us stay home because he's tight with cash. It's embarrassing when he drops us off in that beat-up car. Everyone stares. Harry, I don't want him showing up at my games. He just makes me look lame. Theo, Pete actually knows how to treat us. Mom says that's what being a real dad looks like. Years of sacrifice twisted into failure. Everything I did reframed as humiliation. And their mom. She was the architect of it all, feeding them that story over and over, painting me as the villain and Pete as the savior. I closed the laptop and sat there, hands gripping the edge of the desk. For years, I thought I was raising them alone. Turns out I'd been fighting a ghost war the whole time. But now, I had something I'd never had before. Leverage. They thought they stripped me of my title as father. What they really did was hand me a fortune. And if Pete was already flashing cars and trips he couldn't afford, then that trust fund was the prize he was aiming at. He wanted the money. My ex wanted the money. And my sons, they sold themselves cheap because they thought the grass was greener. Well, the grass on that side was fake. And I was about to start pulling it up by the roots. I didn't have to wait long to see the first cracks. A week after the adoption hearing, Harry texted me a photo. Him and Theo at some trendy restaurant, holding up steaks the size of their heads. The caption read, "Real Dad takes us out." I saved the photo. Receipts. Funny thing was, 2 nights later, I just happened to be at that same place with a coworker. A client dinner got moved last minute, and we ended up there instead. Halfway through my meal, I saw Pete at a table near the bar, chest puffed out like he owned the place. Harry and Theo were with him again. The boys looked proud, like royalty being paraded around. Then the check came. I watched the waiter run Pete's card. Declined. Swiped again. Declined. The waiter leaned in and whispered something. Pete forced a laugh and pulled out another card. Declined again. His face drained fast. Harry leaned toward Theo, whispering something, but Pete waved it off with a fake smile. It's the machine. Happens all the time. Eventually, he slunk off to the ATM across the street, leaving the boys sitting there, awkward and quiet. He came back 10 minutes later with cash, overtipping like he was trying to prove a point. The whole thing was pathetic. I didn't say a word. I just filed it away in my mental folder labeled, Pete, fraud. A few days later, William's accountant buddy called me back. I'd asked him to quietly dig into Pete's finances. He didn't sugarcoat it. Your ex-wife's husband is screwed. He owes around $400,000 to private lenders. His business is bankrupt. He's juggling loans just to keep the lights on. Honestly, I don't know how he isn't in collections already. Suddenly it all made sense. The showboating, the leased cars, the fancy dinners, the Audi nonsense for the boys' 18th birthdays, smoke and mirrors. The man wasn't rich. He was drowning. And if I knew Pete, he was already looking for lifeboats. I didn't tip my hand. I let it play out. Sure enough, a few days later, Harry sent me a WhatsApp video. He and Theo stood next to a red Audi, grinning like idiots. Look what Dad's getting us for our birthdays. One each. Finally someone who doesn't humiliate us. They looked so smug I almost laughed. The car wasn't even his. The license plate still had the dealership logo. I replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Nothing more. Let them stew in their arrogance. They didn't know the accountant's report had already told me everything. Pete couldn't keep his own business afloat, let alone buy 2 sports cars. So the question became, where was he planning to get the money? That's when I thought of Hunter, my ex-wife's dad. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, not since she'd started keeping Harry and Theo away from him. I still had his number. I called. Hunter, it's Sean. There was silence. Then a tired sigh. I knew you'd call one day. How are my grandsons? Not my sons anymore, I said quietly. And then I told him everything. The adoption. The court. The boys running off with Pete. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then his voice came back, shaking with anger. That bastard. Do you know why she kept them from me? Because she knew I'd see through him. Do you know how much he owes me? $60,000. I lent it to him 2 years ago to save his worthless business. He promised to pay me back. I never saw a cent. I gripped the phone tighter. 60 grand. You're kidding. That's not all, he said, his voice dropping. 5 years ago, he faked a workplace accident. Insurance fraud. My daughter helped him forge medical documents. I still have copies of everything. She asked me to store them at my house. I kept them. I sat there stunned. You've got proof. I've got a box full of it. Receipts. Papers. Everything. I stayed quiet. He continued. I was silent because she's my daughter. But now they took my grandsons from me for this con man. No more silence. That box was dynamite. After the call, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, the whole chessboard finally clear. Pete was leveraged up to his neck. My ex-wife had tied herself to him, selling Harry and Theo a lie, turning me into the stingy villain. The boys were bragging about cars that didn't exist. And I had proof. Proof he was broke. Proof he owed family money. And soon, proof he was a fraud. They thought they cut me out of their lives and their future. What they really did was step into a collapsing house and lock the door behind them. And I was standing outside holding the matches. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be a quiet grudge. I'd spent 15 years swallowing everything, working, saving, proving myself with actions nobody wanted to see. If they thought the adoption was the end of me, they were dead wrong. I wasn't ending. I was staging a show. Not some rented ballroom where they'd strut around like royalty. That would have been too easy. Too impersonal. No. This was going to happen in the same house they called embarrassing. The same living room where Harry used to roll his eyes at my spreadsheets. Where Theo complained our couch wasn't modern enough. If they were going to mock my life, then my life was going to be the stage where they fell apart. So I called my ex-wife. I want to host a dinner, I said flatly. A farewell party for the adoption. A proper send-off. You, the boys, Pete, close family. One night to make it official. She hesitated, probably waiting for me to crack. Wow, she finally said. You're finally accepting. Reality. About time. Just make it nice, Sean. Not one of your cheap cookouts. Something respectable. I bit down a laugh. Don't worry. It'll be something they'll never. That night, I sat at my desk, making 2 lists. The first one was for her eyes. A handful of cousins, a neighbor or 2, a few friends, safe names. The second was the real list. Pete's old business partner he owed money to, a couple of creditors who'd been circling, and of course, Hunter. I knew she'd edit the official list and think she was in control, while I quietly sent out the invitations she didn't know about. Then came the setup. I pulled the old projector out of the closet and pointed it at the living room wall. Perfect. Crisp enough that no one could say they didn't see the truth. I started building slides like a lunatic, page after page of my overtime hours logged, my tuition payments, the balance of my savings account, and the pièce de resistance. A scan of the college trust fund clause. Bold. Highlighted. Unavoidable. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. This was an execution. A few days later, I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside were framed photos I hadn't seen in months. Me with Harry and Theo at the beach. Christmas mornings. Little league games. On top was a note in Harry's messy handwriting. Go ahead and hold on to the scraps. The future belongs to us, not you. I stood there in my kitchen staring at it. I thought the ripped photo in court was low. But this was deliberate. They'd actually boxed up my fatherhood and shipped it back like unwanted junk. I carried the stack to the fireplace, lit a match and fed each photo to the flames. Watching them curl into ash didn't hurt like I expected. It felt final, like shutting a door and locking it from my side. That night, instead of wallowing on the couch, I went to the gym. That's where I saw her. Dark hair pulled back, sharp focus, pushing herself hard. She caught me staring once, gave a little nod, then went right back to her set. I didn't even know her name yet. Later, I'd learned it was Elena. But for the first time in years, I realized life might exist outside the wreckage of fatherhood. The closer the dinner got, the more obvious it was that my ex was nervous. She texted me after I sent the guest list. We need to curate this. Some of these names aren't appropriate for a family event. Translation. She'd crossed out every single person who knew the truth about Pete. Perfect. I didn't argue. I just texted back. Okay. Let her think she was pulling the strings while I built the trap under her feet. By the end of that week, the house was ready. Living room cleared. Chairs borrowed from neighbors. Projector tested again and again. My suit hung in the closet, crisp and sharp. The slides were saved in multiple places. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing. For the first time since the courthouse, I felt in control. They thought they stripped me of my title as father. What they really did was set the stage for their own unmasking. The matches were ready, all that was left was striking them. But apparently Pete and my ex-wife had the same thought. Only difference. They tried striking first. Started with a phone call. My phone buzzed, and when I saw the name, I almost laughed. Pete. First time he'd ever called me directly. When his name flashed on my screen, I put the call on speaker and set my old phone on the desk to record. I knew whatever came out of his mouth was going to be worth keeping. Hey, Sean, he said, trying too hard to sound casual. Figured we should talk man to man. About what? I asked, already knowing. Look, now that I'm Harry and Theo's father, I need access to their educational accounts. My lawyer says as guardian, I'm entitled to manage the college trust your dad set up. So, let's not make this messy. Just give me the info and we'll be good. I leaned back in my chair, smirking even though he couldn't see it. That's interesting, I said calmly. Because I don't actually know the details. My father handled everything with William, the family lawyer. You'll have to ask him. Silence. Sharp. Fine. Give me his number. I gave it to him, hung up, and went about my day. 2 hours later, William called me, laughing so hard I could barely understand him. Son, your ex's husband just rang me demanding access to the trust. When I explained the clause that the boys forfeited their rights after adoption, he lost it. Screaming it was impossible, that he was the legal father now. Sounded like he was about to break something. Good, I said. Let him. The next morning my ex-wife called. No hello. No pretense. You thief! She shouted into the phone. You stole our son's money. That trust was for them. They're not my sons anymore, I said flatly. Remember? You made sure of that in court. You know what I mean? She snapped. That money was for their education. You're disgusting. I cut her off. No. What's disgusting is pushing them into adoption just to get your hands on that trust. And now you're mad the plan backfired. Don't call me again unless it's through a lawyer. I hung up before she could respond. 2 days later, I realized how far they were willing to go. My neighbor, Mrs. Porter, caught me in the driveway. She's the kind of person who notices everything. Sean, she said, there were people taking pictures of your house yesterday. Not delivery folks either. Clipboards. Writing things down. Looked official. I thanked her and brushed it off. But inside, I knew something was coming. That afternoon, the knock came. When I opened the door, a social worker and a police officer were standing on my porch. Mr. Alvarez, the social worker asked, we've received a complaint regarding child abuse and financial neglect. May we come in? My heart raced, but my face stayed calm. Of course. They stepped inside, glancing around like they were checking for traps. The social worker pulled out a file. The complaint alleges you denied basic financial support to minors for years, causing psychological harm. There are signed statements from the boys. She set the file on my table and slid it across. I opened it. Harry's neat handwriting, Theo's sloppier scroll, sworn affidavit saying I'd kept them in inhumane conditions, refused to buy them clothes, deprived them financially out of cruelty. The officer frowned. These are serious accusations, Mr. Alvarez. If proven, we're talking about criminal charges. Give me a few minutes, I said, walking upstairs. I came back carrying a box I'd been saving for years. Every bank statement, every tuition receipt, every medical bill neatly organized. I laid them out on the table. Private school tuition paid every semester. Health insurance premiums on time. Groceries, clothing, extracurriculars. 15 years worth documented. The social worker flipped through the files for half an hour. Her expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. This clearly shows you provided well above basic support. The officer looked at me. Do you have any idea why your sons would sign affidavits like these? Yes, I said calmly. Because their parents convinced them to. This is about money. A college trust fund they can't touch anymore. Pete tried demanding access. And when that failed, they filed this. I even have proof. I pulled out my phone, tapped a recording. Pete's voice filled the room. My lawyer says as guardian, I have the right to manage the trust. Then his frustration when I told him he had nothing. The officer's eyebrows shot up. That's highly irregular. The social worker closed the file. We'll need to investigate further, but from this perspective, it seems someone is abusing the system for financial leverage. They left 2 hours later, but not before the officer gave me a warning. If this moves forward, they'll probably try to request a restraining order and freeze your assets. Have your paperwork in order. That night, I sat in my office, the glow of the computer screen lighting the room. They weren't just trying to rob me. They were trying to bury me, false accusations, legal tricks, all of it just to claw at money that wasn't theirs anymore. Fine. If that's the game, I'd take it further. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. One to Harry's future college, one to Theo's. Good morning. I told the financial aid office. I need to formally withdraw my statement of financial support and my guarantee as a co-signer for my son's student loans. The woman on the line sounded surprised. Is there an issue, sir? They're no longer legally my sons, I said evenly. They were adopted by another man. He's responsible for their educational finances now. Also, they recently filed a complaint accusing me of abuse and neglect. That should be noted. There was a long pause. Understood, sir. This will trigger an immediate review of their enrollment. Without verified financial backing, their guardian will be responsible. Perfect, I said. Send him the bill. That afternoon, I sat back in my chair, staring at the clock. My house was spotless. My documents airtight. My finger was on the trigger. They wanted a war over money. They were about to learn what it's like to lose everything you counted on. The matches weren't just ready anymore. The first flame was lit. By the time the night of the farewell dinner rolled around, my house didn't even look like my house. The living room was cleared out, folding chairs lined in neat rows, the projector aimed at the wall. The air smelled of catered food. Nothing fancy, but enough to impress the people who thought I only knew how to grill burgers on a rusty barbecue. I stood in my new suit, cufflinks shining, feeling sharper than I had in years. Elena arrived at my side, dressed simply but elegant. And when she took my arm, I knew I was walking into that night as a man they wouldn't recognize. The doorbell rang. One by one, they filed in. My ex-wife, smug as ever in a glittery dress. Pete already sweating through his shirt collar. And behind them, Harry and Theo, both looking uncomfortable, like they weren't sure if this was a trap or not. Wow, I stopped at the last sentence you left incomplete, keeping every single detail and emotional beat intact, ready to continue the dinner reveal. My ex said, glancing around, "You actually tried. I'll give you that." I smiled. "Sit anywhere you like. We'll get started soon." They weren't the only ones. Hunter arrived, shaking my hand firmly, eyes locked on Pete like a predator, waiting for the right moment. A couple of Pete's creditors slid in quietly, their faces tight with anticipation. I even caught one guy whispering, "Can't wait to see him squirm." Perfect. The food was served first just to keep the illusion. Conversations hummed around the room. Though most people kept sneaking glances at me, they were waiting for whatever reason I dragged them into this house. Then, right on cue, my ex-wife raised her glass. "Here's to family," she announced, grinning like she'd won. "To new beginnings and to Pete, who stepped up where others failed." The room clapped politely. Harry smirked. Theo nodded along. Pete puffed his chest, soaking in the fake praise. I let the applause die, then stood. "Thanks for that," I said calmly. "But I think it's time we clear up a few things. Since everyone's here to celebrate, let's make sure we know what exactly we're celebrating." The room quieted instantly. I grabbed the projector remote, and the first slide lit up on the wall, a spreadsheet of my overtime hours. Line after line, years of late nights and double shifts. For 15 years, I worked 2 jobs. Every cent I could, I put toward raising Harry and Theo. Tuition, healthcare, food, clothes, all documented. Some of you here have called me cheap. Some of you thought I didn't do enough. So, let's put the numbers out in the open. The next slide showed my savings account, the $447,000 balance I'd built over years. Gasps rippled through the room. And that was just me. What you didn't know was that their grandfather also set up a college trust fund. $2 million locked away for their future until the adoption. Click. The next slide showed the adoption decree side by side with the trust clause. The words were highlighted. If the beneficiaries cease to be legal dependents, the funds revert to the biological father. So when Harry and Theo walked into that courtroom and chose adoption, I paused, letting the words hang. They didn't just walk away from me. They walked away from this. Murmurs filled the room. My ex-wife shot up from her chair, red-faced. "You stole their money." I turned to her. "No. You stole my sons from me, and the money legally came back with me when you did." Pete tried to jump in. "That's not how this works. I'm their guardian now. That trust." "Funny you say that." I cut him off. "I have you on recording telling me you wanted access to it." Here's the problem, Pete. You don't get to manage what doesn't exist for them anymore. I hit play on the clip. His voice filled the room. My lawyer says as guardian, I have the right to manage the trust. Then his frustration when I told him he had nothing. The room went dead silent. Click. The next slide popped up. Debts. $400,000 to private lenders. A business bankrupt for 6 months. This, I said, pointing at the numbers, is the man my sons traded me for. They thought he was buying them autos, vacations, a better life. But here's reality. He's drowning in debt. Those cars. I clicked again. A still frame of Harry and Theo's WhatsApp video bragging next to the red convertible. Dealer plates. Not his. Never was. Theo's face went pale. Harry looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. And then Hunter stood. You also owe me $60,000, you lying bastard, he shouted, slamming a folder on the table. You promised to pay it back. Instead, you scammed me like everyone else. Pete stammered, trying to stand, but his creditors closed in, hemming him at the table. I wasn't done. But debt isn't the worst of it, I said coldly. Click. The final slide lit up. Insurance fraud documents complete with signatures. 5 years ago, Pete faked a workplace accident. My ex-wife helped him forge medical records. Hunter kept the proof. So when you hear about the abuse allegations they filed against me, I said, letting it sink in, understand this is who filed them. A con man and his accomplice. Gasps turned to shouts. Phones came out. People snapping photos of the screen. My ex-wife's face crumbled, tears mixing with fury. Harry muttered, we didn't know, but nobody listened. The room had turned on them completely. I set the remote down. You freed me from being your father in court. Tonight, I'm freeing you from my wallet. That's all I have to say. I turned, offered my arm to Elena, and together we walked toward the door. Behind me, chaos erupted, Hunter yelling, creditors demanding answers, my ex-wife babbling about lies, Pete trying to push through but getting cornered, and Harry and Theo just sitting there, frozen in the middle of it all, watching the empire they thought they joined collapse around them. Outside, the night was cool, quiet, almost peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The fire was burning, and I didn't need to stick around to watch them turn to ash. By the next week, the fallout had already started. Pete's creditors didn't wait. They slapped him with lawsuits and froze what little he had. Within weeks, prosecutors filed charges. A few months later, he took a plea deal and got a 2-year sentence for insurance fraud. Hunter handed over the paperwork. Prosecutors pounced. Pete ended up with a 2-year prison sentence. My ex-wife cornered, cut a deal. She testified against him in exchange for probation, but the damage was done. She walked away with a criminal record that made her unemployable in any serious field. Her social circle thinned out, too. The same people she'd flaunted her upgrade to now avoided her like a plague. As for Harry and Theo, reality doesn't care about teenage arrogance. Without the trust fund and without me co-signing, Harry's college enrollment was canceled before the semester even started. Theo's early admit slot got pulled too once the financial support vanished. When I withdrew backing and the adoption paperwork hit, admissions flagged their files. Without verified support, everything stalled, and that black mark followed them. Other universities didn't want to touch them either. The so-called future Pete promised vanished overnight. They got jobs. Harry ended up stocking shelves on the night shift at a supermarket. Theo waited tables at a chain restaurant, serving meals in the same place he used to eat with his friends for fun. They moved into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, splitting rent and bills. No cars, no vacations, no fancy clothes, just paychecks that disappeared the second they landed. Months passed before I saw them again. One Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, there they were, thinner, worn out. Not the cocky kids I'd seen in court. They didn't have the smugness anymore. Just exhaustion and something new in their eyes. Respect, maybe even fear. Hi, Dad, Harry said, voice shaky. I didn't move. What are you doing here? I asked. Theo swallowed hard. We wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I let them in. They sat at the table where I'd once shown the social worker my receipts. Only this time they brought their own. Pay stubs, a budget journal, notes on what they'd been doing to survive. For 8 months we've been working and thinking, Theo said. About what we did. About what you did for us. Harry's voice cracked. We called you cheap when you were working 2 jobs to give us everything. Now we know what it feels like to wake up at 5 and still not have enough. We get it now. They didn't beg. They didn't cry. They just laid out their numbers, their plan. And then Harry said, we're not asking for gifts. We're asking for a loan with interest. We want to earn back the right to be your sons. I didn't say yes right away. I told them I'd think about it. A week later, I sent them a contract drawn up by William, a formal educational financing agreement. The terms were strict: 3% interest, maintain a minimum 3.5 GPA, work at least 20 hours a week, monthly expense reports, bi-weekly video check-ins. It wasn't fatherly support anymore. It was business. They signed without even reading the fine print. Meanwhile, I wasn't standing still. I invested the trust money wisely. And in less than a year, between a hot market and a small real estate flip I backed, it grew by another $800,000. I traveled. I lived. I finally did things for myself. The first video call with Theo was surreal. He showed me his grades. All A's. His budget was tight, every dollar tracked. Thank you for giving us a second chance, he said. You're earning it, I replied, and I meant it. It wasn't the father-son relationship we once had. It was different, better in a way, no illusions, no entitlement. Respect where there used to be resentment. My ex-wife didn't take it as well. She sent messages for months, most of them blaming me for ruining their lives. The last one simply said, I hate you. After that, I changed my number. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far, if maybe I'd been too harsh. But then I'd remember Theo's words during the party chaos. Pete promised us college, cars, trips. He said, you were cheap by choice. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision, and they had to live with it. For 15 years, I carried the weight of being their father. Now I carried nothing. The money was safe. My life was mine. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, I finally understood what freedom really felt like.